After my previous video, it got me thinking about the Nintendo Switch and how we are quickly approaching the 7-year anniversary of the Nintendo Switch, which came out on March 3rd, 2017. It's crazy to think that the Switch has lasted this long and stood relatively unchallenged for the vast majority of its long tenure. And that got me thinking, how is the Nintendo Switch doing right now? Is it worth buying one so late in the game? And realistically, what should you buy if you waited this long? Right now, you can get the original launch Nintendo Switch for about $300, depending on where you buy it. There may be a game included depending on the time of year you're buying one, but overall, it's about $300. You can get the Nintendo Switch OLED model for around $350. That also can occasionally be a little cheaper or include a game depending on when and where you buy said console. And the one that I think is the most compelling is a Nintendo Switch Lite for $200. And not necessarily buying it brand new, especially if you waited this long to get one. I think what a smart play would be is to buy a Nintendo Switch Lite used off of eBay, which you could get around $100. I saw one sell on eBay for $100 multiple times, and I've seen it as cheap as like $90 and $85, which is crazy. But it's such a cheap device that already just the used value of it is pretty low, especially this late into the game. The Nintendo Switch price overall has gone down considerably on the used market. So I think what a real, smart idea would be is to buy a used Nintendo Switch Lite, play on that for the few months, almost half a year maybe, until the next Switch comes out. And not only did you save a bunch of money, the device probably wouldn't have depreciated that much in that amount of time. You'd be able to resell it, keeping all your games when hopefully the new Nintendo Switch has backwards compatibility. So you can migrate all your stuff over to the new Switch, then sell off the old Switch without losing much of, if any, money. And I think that would be the smart play to do. But that's one of many ways you could play this. Now we settled on what you should do if you want to buy a Switch. Let's find out if it's even worth it. Nintendo Switch, like I said, is coming close to 7 years old. How is it holding up? Well, I'm happy to say that the Switch is holding up quite nicely, still getting a whack ton of ports, still getting a massive third-party support, and still getting day-and-day releases even with the brand new consoles. Prince of Persia: Lost Crown, which is granted a fairly light game in sort of that Metroidvania style, and that came out as recently as January. So it's not unlike the Wii U in the past where it had no third-party support whatsoever, but I would say it is noticeable seeing the rapid decrease in third-party support in this last year or so. I'm not expecting a whole lot of massive third-party support going into this last year, but who knows, we might see some of the lighter titles pop up here and there, and we really don't know for sure. And Nintendo does have a bunch of games already finished, sort of just waiting to be released, according to some rumors we've heard over the last couple months. And Nintendo is still supporting the Switch very heavily, and even President Furukawa of Nintendo said the Switch will be their primary focus for 2024. Don't know how true that's going to be because they said the same thing the same year the Switch was announced, so I don't know. But I am confident that we'll probably get one last direct here in the next week or so about, the future of Nintendo Switch, and sort of like one last hurrah for the Nintendo Switch before the announcement of the future successor of the Switch. We're still getting some legacy ports, like Borderlands 3 made it over not too long ago, and that was a very impressive port. Hogwarts Legacy finally made its way to the Switch, and both those games might not look pretty, but run fairly well, and to the point where it's very impressive that they were able to get it to run at all. I certainly didn't believe Borderlands 3 would run as well as it did on the Switch. I'm not saying it's fantastic or perfect, but it's about as good as the Xbox One versions of the games, which didn't run particularly great, for me at least, in the first place on my launch Xbox One. Granted, there are, like I said, compromises. The visuals are kind of muddy, and it's not the highest resolution image you can get on the Switch, but like I said, compromises. So if you're really able and okay with giving up some of those compromises, it's not a horrible way to play these more modern video games. So in that aspect, I think the Nintendo Switch is still a tremendous value. Moving on to how the Switch stacks up against its more recent and newer competitors. And I think nothing better competes with the Switch than the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck is currently being sold at if you get the base model, $300, the same price as the Nintendo Switch, at least for its original model. So comparing those two platforms, yes, the Steam Deck is a very different kind of device and certainly doesn't have most of the exclusive Nintendo's does, but that's something you gotta always take in consideration when you're choosing between different platforms and choosing what to invest in, especially if you waited this long to pick between a Switch and a Steam Deck. You probably didn't invest much in either companies to begin with anyways. So in that aspect, I think the Switch still offers enough granularity in its price, especially if you go down the route that I recommended before with getting a used Nintendo Switch Lite, or even buying a new Nintendo Switch Lite is still cheaper and even sometimes half the cost of buying a Steam Deck. So for your budget conscious gamers out there, the Switch is an awesome choice to make. And granted, I always say never buy a device based on future promises. If you buy a Switch now, it could be very easy in the future for these things to be homebrewed, especially with the recent advent of the Mix Switch, which is a Switch cartridge that can allow you to upload a bunch of your games to it. Granted, it's a little more screwy than we initially thought it would be, but the future modding potential of the Switch is something to definitely take in consideration. Granted, I wouldn't buy it based on that hope, but like I said, it's something to think about if maybe you want to hold on to it after the new Switch comes out. And comparing the Switch to any of its other competitors, I would say the Switch, granted, might sacrifice a great deal in performance, but wins a lot in pricing. Because if you compare it to like an RG Ally, which is at least $600, $700 really, because that cheaper version of the Ally sucks, and the Legion Go is also $700. So it's not like these devices are cheap or equal in price. They are leaps and bounds more expensive. I'm not even going to bother comparing this to other handhelds like from Ayaneo and Iron and stuff like that. Those devices are considerably more expensive. I'm talking about their Windows devices. Their handheld emulators can be pretty, comparative, and that's something to take into consideration. Maybe you don't want to play 100% Switch games, and you can find a emulation device like the Odin 2 that could play a lot of Switch games. And even if you want to sort of just emulate your way through the rest of the library, that's something you could do theoretically until the next Switch comes out. Granted, you wouldn't have invested anything in the Switch library, and if it does include some form of backwards compatibility, you have to start buying all those games you've been emulating. It's always an option, I guess, for those of you who don't want to spend any money. To sort of wrap up all of the points here and give a final answer, the Switch has had a very long and storied life. It had its ups and downs. It still is getting massive support from Nintendo and some third parties. It has beaten most and almost everybody's expectations of what the Switch could have been, and by so much more. The Switch has been an amazing device by all measures, and even today beats a lot of its competitors, at least in price, not always in performance, and that's just a sign of how old this device is. But the Nintendo Switch is still one of the best gaming devices out there, and I would wholeheartedly recommend this device for anybody who's looking for a nice budget console, something meant for the family. Especially if you waited this long, you might consider going down the route I recommended, buying a used or new Switch Lite to save a lot of money and then sell it off when the new Switch comes out, so you would have had to put that much money into the old console that, is old and nobody likes anymore when the new ones come out. The Switch will always have a very close position in my heart for one of the best consoles of all time, and I still recommend this console to many people nowadays. So to finally answer the question, yes, I still do think that the Nintendo Switch is still worth it, and I would highly recommend it to any of you out there who may want one, or who have been considering getting one this late in the game. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you have a Nintendo Switch and are you happy with it still? Are you planning on buying a Nintendo Switch this late in the game? I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, comments, and concerns down below. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And last but not least, have a wonderful day.